Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today I wanted to first start off by saying that I'm very, very, very excited for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7. Yes, I know it is under the tutelage of Disney Star Wars, and we will go ahead and talk about just how bad Disney has been for Star Wars in a little bit. But I must say that in an instant reaction to the trailer, which I know dropped earlier, and I'm sure there will be comments covering that, overall I thought the trailer was pretty good. I'm excited to see what happens with the various characters. I'm very sad to see that it's the end of the series, and I really do wish that the series had had its proper end under George Lucas instead of under the Kathleen Kennedy regime. But of course, we can only get so much. I'm going to be positive when I can be positive, and so far things seem to be pretty cool looking. So let's go ahead and dive into some box office numbers, and this is going to be looking specifically at all of the Disney Star Wars movies. Now, I have an entire document that actually has every single Star Wars film broken down, adjusted for inflation, the actual budget, the budgets adjusted for inflation, and the actual box office net gains and losses. And I actually have that currently live over on ombreviews.home.blog. Yes, I know that's a mouthful. Got to work on that, I know, but you can see both this spreadsheet and also that spreadsheet over there. So if you don't want to wait for me to do a fuller video covering all of Star Wars, then you can go ahead and check that out right now and get yourself a special glimpse to see the methodology behind it. But I wanted to break this down because, man, oh man, Disney Star Wars has really not been as profitable as many people in the media would like to spin it as. Now, the reason why is because they oftentimes will look at just the raw box office numbers and say, but look, The Force Awakens made over $2 billion. And yes, when I adjust for inflation, it actually is up to around $2.2 billion. And again, I will go into the methodology in a second, but that's the number that they look to. What they don't actually look to is how much the studio actually gets, and then also take into account how much it actually costs to make that movie, and so therefore what the actual net gain or net losses on any given film were actually going to be. So I broke down all of the Disney Star Wars films in order, and then also gave us the budget. So this is the budget that they gave us. So I know that some people are going to look at this and say, I think these budgets are a lot higher than what you have listed here. What I have decided to do, though, to be utterly fair, and also to me, I think to exemplify even more so why it really hasn't been a good run for Disney Star Wars, I decided to go with their numbers, which I think in a lot of cases are indeed lowballed numbers, but still spell, I think, very clearly just how poorly Disney has run Star Wars, and basically, as far as the franchise goes, into the ground to the point where they have still yet to make back around $3 billion at the very least when you look to just the film. So these are the budgets that were given to us adjusted for inflation. So The Force Awakens costs the most at $331 million, rather the second most at $331 million. Rogue One costs $283 million. The Last Jedi costs $332, which would make it the most expensive Star Wars film out of the entire bunch, which I think is pretty ironic for a lot of reasons. Solo costs $281 million, which of course it's an insane amount of money for that film. And The Rise of Skywalker is said to have cost around $275 million, but because the film was technically made through 2018-2019, I adjusted those numbers for inflation as well. So just so you all know, these are all based off of these are all adjusted for inflation for up into the year 2020. So if you do your own calculations, you say mine's off by a slight amount. The reason that it might be is because I punched these numbers in to the same website, so that way every film was treated fairly. I actually went ahead and doubled to see if this website was going to accurately portray the numbers. So I actually went to an official U.S. government website, which unfortunately only goes up to $10 million. So obviously I could not use that, or else I'd just want to go crazy figuring all that kind of stuff out, having to basically add in all that crazy stuff, right? So I decided to see if the number that I got from the other website that I use would be similar to this website, and indeed it was. So it's official, or rather it's very similar to what you would get on an official government website, all using American dollars and of course the American inflation. And this is something that I realized, so shout out to, I forget who the person's name was, but they actually did mention this in a comment saying that, well, the adjusted for inflation does not matter based on the country, because as long as you have it in US dollars, then the inflation is going to be based off of the value of the dollar, and it doesn't matter what the value of all those other currencies might be. So I think that was a pretty interesting result, and sure enough, I think that the overall complete worldwide box office numbers are probably going to be pretty damn accurate because of that. So with the total marketing cost, the most expensive of all the films was still The Last Jedi, because of course, whenever you figure out the total marketing cost, or rather the total cost with marketing, what you normally do is you multiply it by 1.5, which again, some movies could have spent a lot more than the typical times 1.5 the budget, which would make them cost even more so. But with all that being said, as I said before, I wanted to try and be as fair as I possibly could. I also put the complete official domestic box office run when you adjust for inflation, just including the original run, so no re-releases were included in these numbers. The same is also true of the total Star Wars breakdown as well, which is what makes the original Star Wars film a little bit different than what some other websites are saying, because I just include the original run there. And so, of course, as you can see, Force Awakens made $1 billion. But here is where the things start to get interesting, because when you look to the original domestic numbers specifically, you have $1 billion made for The Force Awakens, and then it drops to $650 million made for The Last Jedi. And now we're at the point where Rise of Skywalker is around $500 million. So you see consistent drops from film to film, and the question needs to be asked, where did all of that money go? Why is it that we have about almost a $400 million loss, or a $400 million difference in just the domestic marketplace? Because people can try and spin the foreign marketplace saying, oh, well, they weren't as into Star Wars, and the only reason why they watched it in 2015 was because it was this huge giant thing going back to the Star Wars universe, and then they just kind of lost interest. And that would make sense for the foreign markets, but you really can't say that same argument for the domestic marketplace, right? Especially for United States, Canada, Mexico, right? You really can't say that same thing, because it has especially been a huge phenomena, a pop culture phenomena in the United States at the very least. So having $400 million just disappear is pretty crazy. Now, when you look to The Rise of Skywalker, you're looking at almost $150 million difference between those two films. So again, the question needs to be asked, where did this money go? If the movie is doing so well, if Star Wars is doing so well under the Disney tutelage, then why is it consistently losing out on money from the American box office? Not just international, but the American box office when it comes to just the episodic films. Of course, we can talk about the other films like Solo Star Wars Story, which only made $218 million when you adjusted that for inflation. Again, all of these are adjusted for inflation, which is why it might look different than the numbers that you might find yourself. But it does go to show you that, again, The Rise of Skywalker might have been a very good success, but when you compare that to where we are now, especially when you look to the total gains and losses, it really isn't all that impressive. So these are the total box office numbers when adjusted for inflation. So Force Awakens made $2.2 billion. Rogue One made $1.130. So that is the adjusted for inflation number of Rogue One, which is a number I do not think Rise of Skywalker is going to reach, by the way. Last Jedi made $1.39, almost $1.4 billion. And Solo, when you adjust that number for inflation, actually did cross the $400 million mark, making around $401 million worldwide. Rise of Skywalker is currently at $1.035 billion. Of course, that is in real time, and so therefore there's no adjustment that needs to happen on that specific number at this point in time. However, of course, I will continue to be fair to that and have it have the same exact adjustment for inflation number as previously mentioned in other things. But what is even more interesting is when you get into the actual gains and losses. And yes, there was one film that had a pretty substantial loss. So Force Awakens sounds great, right? $2.2 billion global box office. But then you take into account that it cost almost $500 million to make and market the film, and then the studio only gets roughly 60% of that. So as far as actual net gains go, they made a whopping $847 million, which is, for the most part, pretty impressive. Until you then compare that to all of the other films that have happened since then. Rogue One only made $252 million in net gains. Last Jedi, the next of the episodic films, $339 million in net profit. Again, about $400 million less than what had previously been done in The Force Awakens. That's a gigantic drop-off. Solo: A Star Wars Story, which, again, based on the budget that they themselves have given us, and assuming regular marketing, lost $180 million. Once again, Solo lost money, Solo lost big money, and lost roughly $180 million, meaning that if that budget is even higher than what we expected, or if that marketing is higher than what we expected, again, a lot of things that could actually happen, you could see Solo having cost the studio upwards of $200 million. At the very least, assuming they got some tax credits, etc. So that's the one thing I will say that this does not include in their budgets, is that it does not include any tax breaks or budgets or incentives. And there actually are some really cool studies that were being shown or that I was doing some research into and looking into. And what it showed how much a studio or how much the production budget was, but also in individual countries, how much tax exemption or how much actual, incentives they got, which actually would have had an impact on the budget to make it less. I saw one for Rogue One, but as I said, to be fair, I left everything off the table, just gave the numbers that we have looking at it with the raw data. So again, you might see some slightly different numbers, but it really won't make that much of a difference in the end. Rise of Skywalker currently, though, $206 million in net profit. Again, that's assuming the $275 million production budget and a standard $414 million when you add in the marketing. I think the number is a lot higher than that because I think they either spent a lot more on marketing, because dear Lord, the marketing campaign for that film was absolutely insane, or the production budget is a lot higher than the number they're giving us. Either way, though, $206 million is much less than the $339 million net gain, net profit of The Last Jedi. So what do we see from this? Consistent drop-offs. That's what we're seeing. Crazy drop-offs between The Force Awakens. And this is, again, all in the worldwide and domestic marketplace. Again, we've already shown you how the domestic numbers were dropping off. As far as net gains go, not that impressive. That means that when you add all of this together, when you add all of these numbers together, including that $180 million loss, what you're left with is a total of $1.46 billion. So as you can see, it's a sum of F3 all the way to F7. So that is how I got to that number. So $1.4 billion in net profits. Now, some people would say, hey, that's $1.4 billion that you made on all of those films. That's really good. But then you have to take into account the fact that it cost them around $4 billion to purchase Star Wars in the first place. And look to this even further. That was back in 2012 that offer was made, meaning that we need to now look at that number and realize, wait a minute, how much would that be now in 2020 numbers? And if you put that number into the inflation calculator, guess what? That means that the actual number of what they spent on Lucasfilm is actually now $4.5 billion. So in today's money, $4.5 billion is what the actual cost of Lucasfilm was. And then when you take into account how much it cost, the $4.5 billion, and how much net gain and net profit that they've made, all again adjusted for inflation for current day dollars, it means that as of right now, they are $3 billion in the red. Now, of course, this does not include merchandising deals. This does not include Blu-ray and DVD sales, which again, for The Force Awakens, at the very least, was very impressive. But you're looking at areas where you might be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, probably not getting close to at least $1 billion. So you're still at best. Let us assume that they've made $1 billion in revenue in other locations, that they are still around $2 billion in the red from their purchase. Now, some might argue saying, oh, they just need to make a few more movies, or, oh, what about how we can figure out, from subscription sales of Disney Plus for things like The Mandalorian and for merchandising there. Like, there's a lot of things that we don't know about. And again, there's some truth to that. However, I think it's worth noting that if you're just looking at the movies, which is what a lot of them want us to look at, right? I remember there was a CNBC article that said, as of like a couple years ago, that they had already made their money back. And it was just looking at the actual raw box office totals, not adjusting the numbers for inflation, not taking out the cost of the films, and of course, not taking out the theater's cut that they would have to have taken out at that point. Meaning that it's very disingenuous because, yeah, it might look on paper like, oh my goodness, look at all that $2, $3, $4, $5 billion. Oh my gosh, they've made their money back. And then you realize, no, they don't get all that money. They lost money with Solo. And in the end, actually, when you look at it, they're still about $3 billion in the hole. So this is my breakdown of the Disney box office. And this is the reason why Disney has been terrible for Star Wars, because it still has not made its money back. It has led to the first ever Star Wars film to ever lose money. It has led to some of the biggest domestic drop-offs in Star Wars history, and it has led to some of the worst gains and losses of gains for that matter. Because again, $847 million. $600 million later, that's where you're left with. That's the lineage. A film that makes a little over $200 million. And of course, it's still going to make a little bit more money. And these numbers for the Rise of Skywalker have not been updated for today's numbers because I just got home. I know that's why this video is a little bit late. But still, $3 billion in the red. And we're supposed to say that Disney has been a success? We're supposed to look at Kathleen Kennedy and say, she knows what she's doing. She deserves her job. I would recommend anyone that has any affiliation with possible shareholders with Lucasfilm or shareholders with Disney, send them this video, or at the very least, send them the spreadsheet and say, hey, how can you justify that $3 billion red number that seems to be staring in your face? Yeah, you might be able to say, oh, we've made that up with Marvel projects and things like that. But when you look at this as an individual deal, an individual sale in an individual universe, you can't help but see complete and utter failure on behalf of Disney, on behalf of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, Rian Johnson, all of them included. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about this. Did this all make sense? I know some people hate when I do my math videos, but I hopefully made this as clear as I possibly could. And if you want to check this spreadsheet out for yourself, please go check out ombreviews.home.blog. You can find a link to that in the description of this video. Also, please make sure that you vote in this year's Wednesday Raven Awards, where you can vote for the best and worst films of 2019 and also the best and worst people of 2019, including the categories like NPC of the Year and Shill of the Year as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless. And now I want to give a shout out to my January Patreon members: animation commentator Brian P., Dion, Divex, Elizabeth M., Enrique Evangelista, fan addicts of film, Father Christopher Miller, Hail Father, Frank the Tank and the Shawhan Wiener Dog Clan, Harold Francis, the Hunky Chunky Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jeffrey Toon, JJ Jonathan Jerembeck, Lady T, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin, Orange Hat Reviews, Outpost Dyer, Perpetual Punster, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Sir Lanceloto, Theodore Bendon, The DJD Show, Those Two Ball Guys, and Tina B. and Sharon Ferguson. Sharon! Thank you so much for being Patreon members. And of course, to my Subscribe Star peeps, Larry, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, G2 Cool 99, Darkstar 57, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, Harold Francis, J-Rod the Beer Guru, Nebalan G. Adams, and ZK Man. Thank you so much for supporting me this month. You guys freaking rock. And a special new shout out to Jeff Lebowski and Steve Glasker. God bless.